Welcome to the Animal Training Academy Making Ripples podcast show, the show where we share the stories of the ripple-making extraordinaires with behavior nerd superpowers who make up the Animal Training Academy membership. I'm your host and one of the happiness engineers at Animal Training Academy, Kelli Wood from Drop Your Jaws Dog Training in Cape Girardeau, Missouri in the United States. We're absolutely thrilled and grateful to have you here with us today. Make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss a single episode. This show is brought to you on behalf of the Animal Training Academy membership. So if you like the conversations in these episodes, then we want to invite you to continue them with like-minded people in the ATA membership, which you can find out more about at www.atamember.com. Within the membership, you can get access to twice monthly live web classes, the back catalog of previous web class replays, plus a huge library of videos and projects to help you problem solve your training challenges. And we're a sociable bunch with an exclusive private Facebook group and forums area. It's like a Netflix social media platform for animal behavior geeks. Today, it is my pleasure to welcome Kelli Inglis to the show. Kelli is a zookeeper, animal trainer, and all-around bird nerd. Growing up with animal-loving parents, she found her passion for animals very early in life. Unsure of which career route to take, in 2012, she found out a local zoo did keeping apprenticeships and dived right in. After completing the apprenticeship, she moved to a zoo in Devon, found a phenomenal R+ mentor, and found her love for training. Since then, Kelli has worked in a few different collections, helping to enhance the welfare of animals through positive reinforcement training. From crate training porcupines for an enclosure move, training ducks and geese for free flight bird demonstrations, to injection training with dogs and syringe training with parrots. Over the years, Kelli has found her passion in cooperative care training using choice and control techniques. She is currently working in a small family-run zoo, working with birds and reptiles, overseeing the training. As well as working in zoos, Kelli has adopted 4 rescue parrots, started her own business helping pet owners live more fulfilling lives with their pet, and writes a blog about husbandry training and zookeeping. Welcome to the show, Kelli. It is great to have you with us today.
Thank you, Kelli. It's an honor to be here.
Well, we are just going to dive right in because I know we have lots of really fun stuff to talk about today. And I really enjoyed reading a little bit more about your work and your bio there and the wide variety of animals that you work with and have had the opportunity to work with. Could you get us started today by telling us a little bit more about your story, including how you spend your days and the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you sort of mentioned in my bio, I have animal-loving parents. My love for animals started at a very young age. My mum was a vet nurse before I was born, and my dad is an avid birder. So from the age I could walk, my dad had me in the garden birding. And so, yeah, I was in love with animals from as young as I can remember. But actually, when I studied in college, I studied something very different. I was a dancer. So I actually did performing arts college. So the route I was going down was very different initially. It wasn't really, what I thought I was going to do. But I loved dancing. And so, went to college, did performing arts, and then decided actually it wasn't really what I wanted to do, and went back to my idea of working with animals. So my mum had been a vet nurse. I'd always thought, veterinary would be really cool. I was thinking about maybe going down the veterinary route, but I didn't have any qualifications. My sort of theory base, was very minimal. I wasn't a very academic person. Everything I was learning was very practical. So I signed back up to go to college to do animal management. But I was 21 at the time, and everybody going to college was 16. So I was a bit unsure about being an older student, and then found out actually that my local zoo did apprenticeships. So I applied for that and initially didn't get it. But then I started volunteering at a falconry centre and volunteering at the zoo. And then through getting a bit of practical experience working with animals, I then applied for the apprenticeship again and got it that time. So I'd never done zookeeping, didn't really know anything about it, but I'm always someone that just dives straight into my work. Doesn't matter what I'm doing, I'm always 100%. So I started working at this local zoo, and the way they used to do their apprenticeships was that there was the zoo was split up into 5 sections, and you did 2.5 months on each section. And because I'd done a little bit of falconry previously, I thought I wanted to work with birds. But then I, did all the sections and actually found that big cats was something I really enjoyed working with. And we did a bit of everything really, your standard keeping, cleaning, feeding, and they did very minimal training back then. It was quite a new zoo, and training, they were doing a bit of target training with a lot of their animals, and trying to do hoof care with the giraffes and stuff like that. But the training side of things was quite minimal, and I didn't really know anything about it. I hadn't really done a lot of it. And it wasn't a path at that point that I realised I was going to take. When the apprenticeship came to an end, I went down to a zoo in Devon and ended up kind of quite in the deep end. I'd gone from an apprentice to not managing a section as such, but it was a very small collection. It was pretty much one member of staff per section with cover keepers. So I was running what they called the farm section, which was basically a mix of small carnivores such as meerkats and coatis and skunks, and birds. So it's a little bit of both of what I really enjoyed doing. And I met a fantastic positive reinforcement training mentor. Her name was Zara Jackson, or is Zara Jackson. She's still a phenomenal trainer. And together we were a great team. She knew everything about positive reinforcement training. I knew quite a lot about birds and traditional falconry. So combined, we worked together to just improve the welfare of all the animals there at the zoo. And we made a great team. And I just absolutely fell in love with training. I just decided that this is what I want to do. I love it. We were working on just making the lives of the animals, just enhancing it, trying to move them in closures. So the porcupine was one of the first things we worked with. So we had 2 porcupines, Sid and Nancy, and they were being moved into a new enclosure. So they were being moved into the big meerkat desert. So they were in quite a small enclosure initially. And Sid was a wonderful animal. He had no fear of people. So we crate trained him very easily using positive reinforcement. But working with Nancy was the first time I experienced working with negative reinforcement. And because I hadn't done much training, it took me a long time to get my head around the 4 quadrants of operant conditioning. But I realized actually how much of a tool, like a good tool, is to have in your toolbox, in your training toolbox for certain situations. Obviously, there can be a negative side of negative reinforcement if it's used in certain situations. But with Nancy, we used it. Basically, the removal of ourselves was her reinforcer. She was very nervous around people. As soon as we approached her, her quills would raise up. And she'd start foot stomping and just showing aversive signs of us being around her. So we'd approach her to a point where her quills would raise ever so slightly, and then we would step back and let her calm down, offer her food and leave. So we used a bit of positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement at the same time. But yeah, it was a real learning curve for me, and I just absolutely fell in love with husbandry training. So from there, I've just moved around various zoos trying to implement positive reinforcement training into all the animals' lives that I've worked with, just to try and improve them and enhance them. But there's a downside to zookeeping, and something I struggled with a few years back. So in 2015, I'd moved to another collection, and I really struggled with compassion fatigue. So this is something that keepers can get over time. It's a secondary traumatic stress. So if you're experiencing animals that are sick or dying or experience trauma, because some of the animals you get in might be a rescue, you can take it on as secondary traumatic stress, especially if you're working around this a lot. So unfortunately, this is something that I struggled with. It was something that for a long time I didn't realize I had until I listened to a podcast actually on Animal Training Academy by Petra, and I very much resonated with her podcast and realized this was something I was struggling with. So I actually left the zoo world for about just under a year, and just started up my own business doing dog walking and working with clients. I wasn't doing a huge amount of training then. I think I had a big knock in my confidence. I was listening to some podcasts of the Making Ripples podcasts, and a lot of people talked about imposter syndrome. And again, something I have struggled with in the past, and I think still struggle with every now and again. So I stopped training for a little while and just did dog walking and dog sitting. But then I got asked at a conference. I went to an animal training conference and got asked by a lady that attended that conference to apply for a job at Slimbridge Wetland Centre. They were doing a new project, which they had never done before, which was free flight bird shows, but with a very different species. So a lot of bird shows are generally falconry based, birds of prey, or parrots. But this was with ducks and geese and pelicans and wetland species, basically, because Slimbridge Wetland Centre is a British wetland charity. It's a Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust. So yeah, this was a very new project, and I got asked to help with this project. So I ended up sort of going back into the zoo world, and I'm still here and still loving it and just trying to enhance the welfare. I'm not at Slimbridge anymore. I moved home because I started to realise, especially with the sort of pandemic we've just been through, the importance of being a bit nearer to family. So I moved a bit closer to home, and I'm at the local zoo now. But yeah, it's been a hell of a journey. But it's been a good one.
Well, thank you for sharing some of that journey with us. And my gosh, there's a lot of stuff that we could unpack there and talk about. And I definitely want to get to some of the things that you talked about and talk a little bit more about them. Thank you, first of all, for sharing a little bit about your experience with compassion fatigue. I know that is something that affects a lot of people who work with animals, just like you said, taking on that secondary stress that we sometimes deal with. Whether it's trauma an animal has experienced before they came to you, or euthanasia, or stressors that they're experiencing while you're there. But I'm curious if you could share with us, in addition to taking a break from the zoo world for a little bit and spending most of your time, it sounded like dog walking and dog sitting at that time maybe, are there other specific things that you did that helped you kind of work through what you were going through at that time?
I think sharing my story was probably the biggest thing. So I ended up writing a blog and just sort of spilling it all out on paper because I had never experienced anything like it. I didn't really fully understand what it was until I listened to Petra's podcast. And so I just wrote it all down and shared it on some Facebook pages, on some zookeeping pages. And I couldn't believe the response I got. So many people said it resonated with them, that they were just so grateful that I'd shared my story, that it was really nice to hear that other people were struggling with it. And for me, again, because people were resonating, I realized I wasn't alone in the way I was feeling. I have since learned a lot more to help. So like at the time, I wasn't really doing anything to help myself as such. I was just sharing my story, which did help. It was nice to share some of my behaviors maybe at home weren't ideal, and my family got a better understanding of maybe the way I was reacting to things after sharing my story. So yeah, I think sharing at that time was a really big thing, but since then I have learned a lot more. I think self-care is the biggest thing. In animal care, we just always put the animals first. We spend so little time looking after ourselves. The animals are our priority. Many of us not only work in the animal industry, but we have pets at home. As you said, I've got 4 rescue parrots, and I spent a lot of time on one of them. He got very, very sick. I spent thousands and thousands of pounds on vet bills. I got to a point where I thought I was going to lose him. And it all just became very, very stressful, and I wasn't looking after myself at all. I was putting my animals first. So I have attended some workshops online, spoken to a lovely lady in the UK called Jane Ellis, who runs a compassion fatigue workshop. We set up a workshop with a group that I set up on Facebook. So because I had so many people contact me and say that my blog had resonated with them, I decided to create a Facebook group, a support group for people who work in the animal care industry, to be able to share their stories if they wanted to, or just be a place where they can get lots of helpful resources. So I set up this group, and we set up a workshop on the group, and it was a really good workshop. And I think just doing so much research to find all these resources for other people has helped me as well. Because again, I've shared my story. I've realized it's resonated with others, and I've spent all my effort helping others again, and spent a lot of time just focusing on helping other people, which I find reinforcing. But again, I was spending not as much time on myself as I should have been. So thankfully, because I've been doing all this research, I have realized that I need to take care of myself more. So I spend a lot of time trying to get out of the house a bit in nature. I've gone back to doing yoga classes. I love yoga. It's good for the mind. It's good for the soul. It's good for the body. Stretching, especially in a zookeeping role, it's a very physical, demanding job. So yoga very much helps the back pain that we sometimes get. But I was lucky enough to get a paddleboard for my birthday from my lovely sister and dad. So I spend a lot of time, as much as I can. I still need to get out the house a little bit more. But I like to just go and spend some time on my paddleboard in the calm waters around this area, because water for me is a very relaxing thing. So I'm trying to look after myself a bit more.
As I listen to you kind of share about your story and working through compassion fatigue and finding ways to maybe prevent it, hopefully, from happening again, I'm just keep thinking of the word balance. It sounds like you took some time kind of processing what you were dealing with, what you were going through when you recognized that this might be impacting you, and then kind of found some more variety in your life to balance things out with both self-care and also helping to help others who might be going through a similar thing as you. So does the word balance kind of resonate with you at all when you think about your process in dealing with this?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people talk about a work-life balance, and I think it's definitely something. Some people don't like that phrasing. I think it's a difficult one. We end up spending so much time in our work. We are very passionate about it. And a lot of the time, work becomes our life. And actually, I keep trying to sort of say to myself, I'm not living to work, I'm working to live. I love my job, but it's not my life. I've got to find some sort of balance and have a life outside of work as well to keep my mental well-being at a good level. So yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you for sharing a little bit about that particular part of your story with us. I'm sure that it will resonate with some folks who are listening today. And I know we'll talk about this again later, but for people who are listening and maybe who want to reach out to others who are dealing with compassion fatigue or who have dealt with it before, where could they find that blog that you talked about in your Facebook group?
Yeah, so I have 2 pages. So the Facebook group is www.facebook.com/groups/compassion awareness. My blog will be shared in that group, but my blog page is www.wingspawsandclaws.co.uk.
Thank you. And we'll talk a little bit later in the show about any links as well. And you can share those again if you would like. And we will, of course, link those in the show notes too. So thank you for sharing all of that so far. I also, as I was listening, Miha thanks you as well. As I was listening to you share your story, your journey to animal training, I thought, wow, this really just seems like kind of a classic how to get into animal training story. Do you have any tips for people who are listening to the show and maybe they're training right now? They love animals. They're spending some time training right now, but they're not working with animals professionally. Do you have any ideas of things that you did that you found really beneficial that might help people to get into the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think depending on the route you want to take, zookeeping very much relies on a lot of voluntary and practical experience. So I spent a lot of time volunteering. Even when I did my apprenticeship, I went to other collections and did work experience at other collections whilst I was doing my apprenticeship, just to try and gain as much information and knowledge and experience as possible, because it's very practical based. So yeah, zookeeping, even people that have, spent years in university getting degrees, if they don't have the practical experience, it's very, very difficult to get into the industry. It's a very demanding industry. There's a lot of people wanting to get in. So yeah, I think a lot of the reason I managed to get in was I just worked really hard. I really just wanted to prove myself for myself and for the people I wanted to work for. And I definitely think it's paid off. For me, I'm very lucky to be where I am today. I don't think I would be where I am if it wasn't for all the hard work I put in. For the training side of things, I guess most of what I've done is joining places, organizations like Animal Training Academy. I've also recently joined, I can't remember the quotation for it, but international, I can't remember, it's behavior consultants or something.
Maybe the IAABC, the International Association of Animal Behavior Consultants, is that it?
Yeah, that's the one. Thank you very much.
I'm not sure I have the words that make up the acronym right. I think so, but I'm not sure.
But yeah, I recently joined them, and I just think there's so many other people in these communities that you can share and talk with. I go to a lot of training conferences, and I love to meet other trainers and learn from them. I think the biggest thing in training is constantly learning. For me, if I ever feel like I've stopped learning, then I need to stop what I'm doing, because I don't think you ever stop learning. So, I think constantly just keeping up with the science, keeping up with the, most recent way of doing things. I think it's very important to keep up to date with the best practices.
Thank you for those suggestions. And I really like what you said about joining groups like Animal Training Academy or the IAABC. I know that's been particularly valuable to me to be a part of groups like Animal Training Academy and others. And there are folks who I consider mentors who I was connected to as a result of being in ATA. And I know that when you were speaking earlier, you shared about the importance of the mentor who you found early on and worked with, and how she got to learn about, I think, birds of prey a little bit from you, and you learned about positive reinforcement training from her. So I think those mentor relationships are really important. And for some people who maybe aren't physically close to somebody who can mentor them, these online groups can be invaluable, I think, in finding people to serve as mentors. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. So before we shift, I do have one quick question for you. Favorite animals to work with? I mean, my goodness, you've worked with skunks, meerkats, big cats, falcons, parrots, like all kinds of animals. Do you have, I'm sure you love them all, but are there any that you enjoy working with kind of more than others? You mentioned big cats earlier, but what are your kind of maybe top 3 animals to work with?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think it depends what sort of way you look at things. From a training perspective, mammals are, I would say, can be quite a lot easier to train. Birds have very much a fight or flight response, and usually they take the flight response. So for a bird, it's much easier to move away from people. And I find mammals generally are a bit more curious. But I think my top 3 that I've worked with. So I had a pelican called Sprout at Slimbridge. He was hand-reared by me and one of my colleagues, and he was just a phenomenal character. I think the experience of hand-raising him for free flight bird displays was just something that, it was just an experience of a lifetime. He was a lovely, lovely animal. And yeah, just having that bond with him, he was 10 days old when we got him. So he was very, very small. He was this ugly little naked thing that just grew into this beautiful, handsome bird. And we had a fantastic relationship. I think one of the biggest things for me, again, early on, was working with a meerkat called Shivers. I didn't do a huge amount of training with him, but he was the first animal I worked with that I felt he was very misunderstood. And he was the first animal that I really created a bond with. So this zoo that I worked at down in Devon, he was a meerkat that was claimed to be aggressive. He'd been labelled aggressive, and nobody wanted to go in the enclosure with him. He was crated to be so that they could clean his enclosure. And after a couple of weeks of work in there, I decided that I wasn't going to crate him. I was just going to see what happened. And I went in to clean, and he ran over at me, and I just stayed really, really still. And he scent marked all over my arm. And then going back to his history, it turned out he'd been a hand-reared meerkat that had been pretty mollycoddled, very much a very tame, spent a lot of time with keepers, never really interacted with other animals. And that keeper had left, and he'd been put in an enclosure with another meerkat and didn't really know how to be a meerkat, and then wasn't really getting the human interaction that he was hoping for. So out of frustration, he'd learnt to bite because he just wasn't getting the attention he required. So yeah, once I learned his history and that he was biting out of frustration rather than aggression as he'd been labelled, our relationship just became a wonderful relationship. I did get bitten by him. It was my fault. I'm not blaming the animal. I never blame the animal. He had, after we'd built this relationship and he'd sort of really calmed down, again, being around people, him and his female meerkat that he lived with, Daisy, they actually had babies. And then unfortunately, I came in one day and thought that they were dead. They weren't. They were just very, very cold. And in the process of me trying to warm them back up and bring them back to life, he then realised that he wasn't getting the attention again that he wanted and bit me. But I was like, this is because I'm not giving him the attention he requires. I know, what he needs from me. And I wasn't giving that to him at the time because my focus were on his pups. So yeah, he got no blame for that. I've still got the scar. I've still got the memory of him. I'm very proud of this scar. I miss him very much. But yeah, it was a wonderful bond we built. Oh, and the last one, I just think parrots. I love parrots. I've got my rescue parrots. Yeah, I think I could talk for days and days about all the animals I've worked with. But yeah, I think the bonds I've built with some of the animals are my biggest thing. Yeah.
Thank you. That was fun to hear about some of those individual animals who you have worked with, and your joy in working with parrots is clear on your face, and I would imagine in your voice as well for the listeners. And I think hearing about some of those animals provides a nice segue into our next topics of discussion. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about specific training with you. So could you share with us now a recent training related challenge that you've experienced and or are experiencing, and kind of work us through your process with the challenge and some things that you've learned from it?
Yep. So I think my biggest training challenge has been probably going on for a while. And I think that's with my own pets, my own parrots at home. So I have 4 rescues. I have 2 cockatiels and 2 eclectus. The eclectus are both feather pluckers. So Billy is a Solomon Island eclectus. I've had him since 2015. And he was the one that I said got quite sick. So we've dealt with a lot of issues with him. And my other parrot, Merlin, I've had him for, when did I get him? 2016, I think. So that in itself brought on some more issues with Billy. So yeah, I rescued Merlin. Billy was quite settled with me and the 2 cockatiels. He lived quite happily with them, but bringing another parrot in actually made him sick again. Unfortunately, the stress brought on lots of problems. He got crop infections and stuff like that. So I've been working with both of them for various things. So Billy, because he's pretty much completely naked on his body anyway, he needs to wear a jumper in the winter. And I have been trying desperately for quite a long time to try and get a jumper on voluntarily, which is not working out very well because he hates anything being on him. He hates being touched by people. He hates material touching him, and because in the past I just had to get a jumper on him. He's got quite a negative association with jumpers. I say a jumper, it's a sock with holes in it. But yeah, he has quite a negative association with these being put on because in the past, unfortunately, I haven't had time to train them, and they've just been put on. So that is a challenge I'm still working through with him. Merlin, when I got Merlin, I was told he'd never bitten. He was really friendly. And obviously he'd come into a new home, come into a new environment. He had been in a rescue centre for quite a few years, from my understanding. He'd been put into this rescue centre with a female that he'd grown up with. The female unfortunately passed away, and he was living in an aviary with a cockatoo. So he'd been living in this aviary with this cockatoo for quite a while. The cockatoo got rehomed and he was on his own. So I was approached by the rescue centre to ask to take him on because I had a collector's experience. So as I said, I was told that he had never bitten and he was very friendly. Obviously, coming into a new environment, his behaviour very much changed and I couldn't pick him up. As soon as I tried to approach him with my hand to pick him up, he'd lunge for me, he'd bite me. He was very unhappy, and I was like, I need to do something about this. He's not happy, I'm not happy, and I want to make him comfortable. I want him to settle. He was a very nervous bird. If you approached him, he often flew in the opposite direction. So I decided I want him to give him control. I wanted to give him choice and I wanted to give him control. So I trained him to tell me when he wanted to be picked up. So now what he does is he lifts his right foot. That cues me that I'm okay to approach him. And then I offer him, I learned that he doesn't like hands. He much prefers to step up onto my arm. So I offer him my arm, and then he will step up. So yeah, I very much decided that I want my animals to have complete control and choice in my home. But so it took Merlin about 2 years to fully settle and accept me and his new home and family. And now I have the opposite problem. He is a Velcro bird. I cannot leave the room without him wanting to be on my shoulder. So now we're working through that. So I have bought him a much bigger cage. So Billy and my cockatiels go out in the aviary. I have an aviary outside, but I can't put Merlin in the aviary because if I'm not there, he screams. And I do not want my neighbours to hate me. So I decided that I was going to buy him a very big cage in the house so that he had a bit more space. I'm in a rental, unfortunately. So my birds previously were used to having free access to the house all day. But I can't do that in my rental property at the moment. So I bought him a much bigger cage. He has much more foraging opportunities, much more opportunity to just hopefully be a bird. And I bought him a parrot stand as well. So I'm just spending as much time as possible reinforcing parrot behaviours. You know, him being on his own, hanging out on his own. Him and my other parrot, Billy. They got on fairly well. In the beginning, when I first got them, Merlin was really good with Billy, and they got on quite well. But the more he's become a Velcro bird, the more he sort of shows, let's label it as jealous behaviours. And if Billy is around me, near me, interacting with me, Merlin he approaches and screams and just gets a bit funny. So I'm trying to work on training, doing training with Billy whilst Merlin watches and is staying nice and calm, and vice versa. So yeah, I think my biggest challenge is me. I have struggled with my mental health a little bit. I do get a little bit of imposter syndrome and sometimes just think, do you know what, I can't do this. If I can't do it with my own animals, then I clearly can't do this. And I know that's not the case, but I need to make more time for my animals at home. I sometimes just get home and just lose all motivation to do anything, and I just sit on the sofa and do nothing. So I think my biggest training challenge is probably training myself to be more motivated to then work with my parrots more. So yeah, it's something we're working through. Billy, when I got Billy, he couldn't fly. He was a lot more naked than he is now. He had no primary feathers, no secondary feathers, no tail feathers. He was this little stump of a bird, bless him. And he's managed to grow all his primaries, all his secondaries, all his tail back. I think he must have been feather clipped from a young age because he'd never tried to fly ever. And he is now dragging me around the living room. So he He likes to flap on my hand. So I don't sort of like drag him around the house and force him to fly or anything like that. He very much flaps and drags me around. He doesn't want to let go of me because he's not quite got the confidence to fly on his own yet, but he loves to flap and drag me around the house. So his confidence is building. I'm trying to do a lot more training with them at the moment. I've started doing some protected contact nail clipping with them because neither of them really like to be touched. And I like to do protected contact with a lot of the animals I work with, especially if they're nervous. Both of them have obviously got a bad history with tactile for whatever reason. So if I'm doing it protected contact where they're in their large cages, and I'm on the outside, they've got the choice to move away from me if they want to. So yeah, I'm trying to work on stop buttons as well. So if they're stationing, I'll carry on. If they're not stationing or targeting, then I'll stop what I'm doing. So yeah, it's still a work in progress. It's been a work in progress for many years, but we're getting there.
I am 100% certain that there are other trainers who totally identify with your statement of you. I think you put it something like you being your biggest training challenge, maybe, and that really identify with that. After working all day with other people's animals, sometimes coming home tired and not wanting to train with our own. And I'm 100% certain of this because one of them is sitting right here who totally identifies with that. But I'm sure that listeners do as well. And I too sometimes feel bad for not training the animals in my own life a little bit more. But I really like what you said about giving one of your birds like a larger cage inside and more kind of enrichment opportunities inside. And I wonder if sometimes it's not necessarily, like for me at least, I wonder if sometimes it's not necessarily that I have to, and I'm putting have to in kind of air quotes here, but not necessarily that I have to do more training with my animals, but maybe there are more ways I can think of to set up the environment so that they can be more enriched with that training or without, and sometimes training needs to be done. And sometimes, of course, we want to do it, but sometimes it's the end of the day. So I totally identify with that. Thinking about that too, I'm wondering when you brought that larger space in, did you notice any other kind of behavioral changes that you wondered if they might be attributed to a little bit more space, a little bit more time, I think you said, to just be a parrot? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely. So actually, about 6 months ago, I had to take Merlin to the vet because he had a swollen preen gland, and he went in a few times. And the last time he went in, the vet said, okay, the preen gland seems fine, but he's showing me a lot of hormonal behaviors. Eclectus can be very hormonal parrots. And so he was showing a lot of behaviors to people rather than to other birds. And the vet said, I'd like to put him on a hormone implant. I think it would really help. And I was like, okay, sure. You're the vet. You know what you're talking about. He likes to regurgitate on me and try and mate with blankets. So yeah, go for it. It really helped his hormonal behavior. But I noticed that it brought out other behaviors in him I hadn't seen before. He became quite destructive. So he was going down to the bottom of his cage and shredding all the newspaper in the bottom of the cage. And I was adding more newspaper to shred, and he was still just shredding and shredding. And I mean, they get enrichment every day. So my parrots, they'll get their fruit and veg in a bowl, but all their pellet that they get is always in some sort of enrichment item. When I first got Billy, he had no idea what enrichment was. I had to teach him how to use enrichment. And now that's the best thing. Like, he waits in the morning for his enrichment when I go to work. Like, he knows that he's getting that enrichment item. So they've always had lots of enrichment, lots of foraging opportunities. But since I've got this bigger cage, I have noticed that that destructive behavior has just stopped, just completely stopped. It's so big, this cage, that he actually has to do short flights between his toys. So he's got lots of hanging toys and stuff. And his old cage, he could easily just reach one and just climb around and wasn't really doing much flying. He flies around the living room. You know, he's out as soon as I'm home. All the birds have free access again, but I can't leave them out when I'm not home to keep an eye on them. So yeah, he was having to do short flights and having to move around a lot more. And because there was a lot more floor space, I was able to provide him with not just one or two enrichment items, but several enrichment items. And, you know, he gets boxes now with just paper that if he just wants to shred it up, he can. And I see him just spending a lot more time just sitting and preening and being a lot more calm. I don't know whether it's helped that we've rearranged the living room a bit to fit in this big cage, and now the cage is right next to the sofa. So when I'm sat on the sofa watching TV, he's next to me, but not clinging onto my shoulder because he's in his cage. He's, you know, just being a bit more of a bird and hanging out by himself a bit more and not being quite as needy. Like previously, if he was in his cage, even if I was in the room, he'd just sit there doing what we call baby wings. Like he'd just lean forward and his wings would be going like his little baby just wanting attention. And he would just sit there and do that, even if I was in the room. If he sees me coming home from work, that behavior still happens a little bit, but I've definitely seen a lot more calmer, a lot less sort of needy behaviors from him. So I think that has definitely helped, which is lovely.
I love it. Sometimes I think that we could look at behavior and see a training challenge there because we're trainers, and maybe that's the kind of set of glasses that we have on, you know, and think that maybe we should be doing more training. But it sounds like you came up with a beautiful kind of antecedent arrangement strategy to change behavior and provide your bird with a little bit more of what he needed that didn't necessarily need to be a training challenge per se. So very cool. Thank you for sharing that with us. Could you tell us now about a particular training story that you are proud of and or that you found reinforcing?
Yeah, this one I'm definitely proud of and find reinforcing. So again, going back to that lovely little zoo down in Devon, working with my incredible mentor, Zara, she didn't know anything about birds of prey, and I'd very much done birds of prey traditionally. So traditional falconry is very much relying on weight management. You fly a bird at a certain weight, you limit their food intake if they're not at that weight or if they're not performing the way you want. And I didn't really like this way of working with birds, but I didn't know any differently. So when I met Zara and she taught me about positive reinforcement training, she wanted to change the way the birds of prey at this collection were being worked with, and I was all for it. I couldn't wait to get my teeth stuck into this one because like I said, I'd sort of done very traditional falconry and I didn't really like the way it was being done, sort of keeping birds hungry and just working with them for food motivation and not. I think there's good falconry and there's bad falconry. There's a lot of people that don't really understand and build relationships with birds. So their birds are hungry all the time. And I don't like that way that it can be done. So yeah, we had this lovely Bengal eagle owl called Alfie. And when I started, I was told that he was a boy. He was in a very small aviary. It was like 6 foot square. It was very small, not really big enough for a wingspan to open. And I'd been told that it had been kept at this weight that these previous falconers had been told them to keep him out. But nothing was being done with this bird. This bird hadn't flown. So generally, if you're flying a bird, you keep it at a flying weight. And if you're not, you fatten it up. But unfortunately, there was just a bit of a lack of understanding. These falconers had told this zoo to keep, because they were external falconers, they'd sort of come in, trained these birds and left. They told, from my understanding, they'd told the zoo to feed this amount of food. So when I got there, I was working with this bird and I was feeding him on the glove. And I was about to leave and I was like, oh, this bird's eyes just changed. And I was like, he's going to attack me. And I just very quickly had to turn my head so that he pinned the back of my head and not my face. And I was like, there's something going on here. There's something not right with this bird. So we caught him up, had a feel and a body check and a body score. And he was so skinny, so underweight. And then it turned out that this bird wasn't male at all. It was female. And in birds of prey, females are a third bigger than a male. So basically, this poor Bengal eagle owl was a very, very underweight female. And for a long time had been kept at a male's flying weight, so was severely skinny. So I stopped everything with her. I was like, we're not training, we are just going to feed this bird. And then I was told we could build her a new aviary. So I was like, amazing. So we built her this big flight aviary. It was on a hillside. It had natural trees. In a lot of like traditional falconry, birds are kept in quite small aviaries with nothing, like pea gravel on the floor, maybe a nest box and some branching, and that's it. I love natural enclosures. Falconry or no falconry, I think all animals deserve to be in a natural exhibit. So we built her this lovely massive aviary on a hillside. It had trees and bushes, ferns, and just all natural habitat that was around the area. We moved her in there and just fed her everything she wanted to eat until she started leaving food. And then when she started leaving food, I was like, cool, let's start some training now. I don't know where the quote "wise old owl" came from, because working with owls, they're not that wise. It really took her a long time to understand what we were asking of her. So in the beginning, we decided that we just wanted to introduce a marker. So we used a whistle because Zara had come from a marine mammal background, and they usually use whistles. And it meant with falconry that you had your hands free as well, because obviously you've got a falconry glove on one hand and you want to reinforce with the other. So we used a whistle as our marker, so we had our hands free. So we just were offering her food while whistling, and she just was like, what? She was absolutely clueless. And then one day it was like a light bulb switched on, and suddenly she was like, that whistle means food. Oh my God, this is the best thing ever. And that was it. We just skyrocketed with training then. So initially, she was flying to the glove. We were whistling once she landed on the glove, and then reinforcing her. And then we wanted to build up the speed from her leaving the perch. So we started marking the movement of her leaving the perch as the behavior we wanted from her to just try and pick up speed. She just became an incredible bird. Because we then started this positive relationship with her, she was never hungry. She was always fed as much as she wanted to feed, and still did training with her. She just changed. She just became this beautiful bird. She heard my voice across the other side of the zoo, and she'd start calling to me. It was the loveliest thing. After I left, I went back to visit 2 years later, and the same thing happened. She heard my voice and she just started hooting at me. It was the cutest thing. That for me was so reinforcing that I hadn't seen this bird in 2 years, and she still got so excited to hear my voice after just after the relationship we built. It was phenomenal. We did start doing some work with her outside of the aviary. We put her on a creance, but she wasn't particularly keen on it. She'd come out, she'd sit on a perch, but she loved to just sit there and take the world in. So we never ended up doing displays with her. The zoo we worked at didn't want to spend the money on telemetry anyway to do free flight bird displays. So we decided against putting her in a display. She was happy living in an aviary, and we just did training in her aviary with her. And she was a very happy bird, and I think she still is a very happy bird from the sounds of it. I still speak to the people that work with her now. I don't think she quite responds to them in the same way she responded to me, which again is just really reinforcing that we had that bond. But yeah, it was a phenomenal experience, and just really, really proud of where she came after, the ordeal she kind of went through and how far she came. And yeah, just super reinforcing for me. So happy days.
What an incredible story. And I definitely see why that would be reinforcing for you. Another fantastic example of how sometimes things aren't a training problem, but we need to look at those things like nutrition and is the animal getting everything else they need first, because she surely was not. What a sad beginning of that story, but a beautiful, happy end. So I can definitely see why you're proud of that and find it reinforcing. So thank you for sharing that story with us today. And thank you for everything that you have shared with us today. I've really enjoyed chatting with you and learning a little bit more about what you do. And learning a little bit more about some of your story. So thank you very much for that. Before we wrap up, could you let everybody know how they can get a hold of you? How can people reach out, get in touch, find out more about the work that you're doing?
Yeah, not a problem. So I have a website, which it's just my blogs, really. So that's wingspawsandclaws.co.uk. So that's where I sort of just share a bit about husbandry training. I have my compassion fatigue blog on there, and I've written a bit about sort of zookeeping and how I got into the industry. If anybody would like to sort of join the compassion fatigue page, it's facebook.com/groups/compassion awareness. It is a very safe space to share stories. You can post anonymously if you don't want people to know who you are, but it's just full of really good resources and just information to help you if you do feel like you're maybe struggling with those sorts of things. If anybody would like to contact me personally, that's absolutely fine. I have an email. It's kelly.inglis@outlook.com. I have a very unusual spelling, so we'll just write all that down in the notes. But yeah.
Well, thank you, Kelly. Thank you for everything that you are doing for animals, including the human animals in our industry. And thank you for taking the time to come and share some of your story with all of us today.
Thank you for having me, Shelley. It's been really wonderful. It was an honor to be asked to be a part of this podcast show, and it's been really enjoyable chatting with you.
We do, of course, appreciate all of you tuning in as well. And if you have enjoyed this episode and are interested in carrying on the conversation about working with the animals in our lives in the most positive, most fun, and most choice-rich ways, then as mentioned at the start of this episode, the Animal Training Academy community is waiting for you. Head on over to www.atamember.com and click on the membership button in the main menu to learn more about what members are describing as the Netflix social media platform for behavior geeks. That's it for this episode, though. Thank you so much for listening. You'll hear from us again soon.